into a special midday edition of the Longhorn Livestream. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Jeff Howe and CJ Vogel. Jeff and CJ were there where Steve Sarkisian took the podium just moments ago, talking about spring ball headed up here. Jeff, CJ, before we get going on specifics, like there is some injury news to go over, coaching staff moves, NFL OTAs, a lot of stuff to discuss. First and foremost, I want to ask you guys about Sark's overall tenor. You know, did he come out chipper? Was he a little bedraggled? What was the general sense of him?
He's cracking some jokes early on. I mean, he was in a good mood. I would say, you know, it certainly felt like he wasn't still dwelling on the loss to Ohio State. So looking forward, of course, he's certainly in a good mood that 14 of his guys were in Indianapolis for the combine. And of course, looking ahead to the pro day and the draft. It's looking again to be like one of those marketing opportunities for the University of Texas and his program.
We kind of got, probably everyday relaxed Sark, Bobby. You know, the last time we dealt with Sark was, I'm coaching for a national championship, got the blinders on, not time to suffer fools, Sark, which is two very different guys. But no, it was pretty chill for his first availability since then.
Well, it was chill, but I tell you what, the injury news was not. DeAndre Moore out for spring. Anything else other than that coming out of Steve Sarkisian? And did he give any indication of the seriousness of that injury, guys?
Not specifically with DeAndre Moore, though, again, here at On Texas Football, we believe that's a lingering toe issue that had been kind of slowing down DeAndre Moore from the late season. So he will be limited in the spring, if not for all of it, for most of it at least. Of course, he did mention running backs Christian Clark, CJ Baxter, still recovering from their season-ending injuries a year ago as well, as is Colton Vasek, who was in a sling for a shoulder injury that he had a procedure on earlier this winter as well. One note I will add there, it was pleasantly surprised. Sarkeesian was pleasantly surprised, he said, with the recovery of Christian Clark. Of course, we talked about the squatting photo that came out from Texas football of him, I believe, front squatting about 275 pounds. So pretty good there. And then Derek Williams as well. He will be limited for most, if not all. Sarkeesian didn't provide a timeline for Clark, for Baxter, or for Williams.
I think what the interesting thing there, Bobby, is on CJ Baxter, and I think this applies to all those guys, but, you know, Sark was asked about Baxter specifically. They're not going to rush him back. And he did mention the risk on an ACL, the risk for re-injury. He specifically brought up DeMarvion Overshown and Jonathan Brooks in the NFL, how they suffered it and then re-injured it again. So he basically said, look, with CJ Baxter, he's got up until the Ohio State game to get him ready to go. So don't expect to hear much about CJ Baxter this spring other than continue the injury rehab. But I don't think Sark is worried at all about rushing him back.
Well, it's good news about Christian Clark, and it sounds like the team, generally speaking, is relatively healthy. Guys, OTAs and what Sark is going to do with spring ball. I'm going to let you guys kind of re-explain what Sark had to say in that regard.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing there is the main thing I took from it, Bobby, is he's, typically if you go out to a Texas practice the last few years, typically they're two-spotting everything. They're running things on two different fields. The way he described it is, and Sark, I think we need to remember Sark goes to a lot of NFL OTAs. He'll visit with coaches in the offseason. So he's really big on spring ball being a time to teach and maybe doing things on one field, extended individual periods where guys can really teach. This is one of the reasons, Bobby, why in hindsight, I talked about, hey, when he was hiring new guys, I think teachers first and foremost had to be at the top of his priority list because you do have a lot of young guys. You've got guys like Ryan Wingo and Trevor Gooseby. I know those guys, their position coaches didn't change, but you got guys that you need them to take a step forward. So I think teaching this spring is really big. So, CJ, that's kind of what I took from it is it all boils down to just teaching is going to be the big thing.
Yeah, on top of that, development's big. Keeping these players fresh, too, is going to be of the highest of importance as well. 16 games were just played. You don't need to rush them back into multiple scrimmages once again, which Sarkeesian did say that's not out of the picture for this spring in the schedule. Right. Texas will practice 3 days a week starting Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, flipping around, kind of just flipping their weeks back and forth from a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. So they're going to get after it. Again, just staying loose, I would say, a little lighter this scrimmage or this spring. And one thing on top of that, Bobby, just because we talked about the five guys earlier who were quote unquote limited for the spring, that doesn't mean other guys won't be having a lighter schedule either.
Yeah,
that's
probably, you know, guys like Trey Wisner, Anthony Hill, guys that had a lot of, you know, I know load management's a term you hear about in basketball, but those guys played a lot of high leverage snaps. You probably don't need to see Anthony Hill in a scrimmage situation or Trey Wisner in a scrimmage situation. So Sark didn't say that specifically, but that's some of the stuff we've been talking about on the channel, that, you know, some of those guys that were high usage guys last year, probably see a little bit less of them or hear less about them in those spring scrimmages.
I tell you what, guys, you look at some other aspects of this and what we're talking about. There will be a fan appreciation day on April 26th. That will also have a practice of sorts. He's not saying exactly what that will be, but.
Uh-oh. That's not good, but we'll take it from here. April 26th, Fan Appreciation Day for the Texas Longhorns. Of course, what we're expecting and what might actually occur, we'll have to wait and see what that might look like. But for the time being, getting to see these guys just throw on the field, get to work out with their individual coaches, get to see who's healthy, who's not, who's running around, what kind of body developments and changes will be one of the more important things for me. Jeff, I'll ask you this, because we did hear Steve Sarkisian talk about it today. Going to that NFL model, what are you looking forward to seeing and kind of hearing about over these next 15 practices or so?
Yeah, to me, it's a couple things. And Sark mentioned one thing today. Arch Manning's leadership is really starting to show. So I want to hear about, you know, who are the guys stepping up, because you look over the last 2 years, you've lost a lot of really good leaders. I don't need to run them down from a name standpoint, but hey, this is the first time Sark's going to coach a game and Jake Majors isn't going to be on the field. You know, there's a lot of guys you could say that about. You know, Kelvin Banks is gone. This is the first time Sark's going to coach a game where Barron Sorrell's not there. Jahdae Barron's not there. Hayden Connor's not there.
Right.
So you got a lot of guys to replace from a leadership standpoint. So I want to hear, that's always something I'm interested to hear about. Who are the leaders that are taking a step up? I think as far as the practices go, CJ, I think it's answering some, maybe not answers, but getting hints to answers on some of those questions we have, like, hey, what do you do with a guy like Michael Terry? What kind of role is he going to play? You know, though basically, especially with DeAndre Moore out now, you've basically got the 3 redshirt freshman wide receivers and the 3 true freshman wide receivers. So basically like 6 guys competing for about 4 spots in that receiver rotation. So what's that going to look like? So hopefully we get to kind of get a hint of some answers to those questions. But I'm not expecting it to be, you know, a spring where we typically hear about a lot of depth chart battles. I think it's going to be more about growth, getting guys ready to go, because something else Sark mentioned today too, he found out with that college football playoff run, he was asked, hey, what'd you learn about the CFP? And he said there has to be more of an emphasis. There already was, but even more of an emphasis on getting the young guys experience in non-conference play. And he mentioned Trevor Goosby specifically, and as much as he had to play towards the end of the year, they wondered out loud as a staff, hey, did we do this kid a disservice by not giving him more snaps early on? So I think especially you're probably not going to see, you know, Michael Terry play 60 snaps against Ohio State.
Right.
But, you know, against San Jose State and Sam Houston, those other non-conference games, you'll probably see a lot of those true and redshirt freshmen.
Yeah, on top of that, you mentioned Trevor Goosby there. There's a big conversation now about getting the guys ready early on. Sarkeesian mentioned that as well. It's going to be interesting because going to the wide receiver spot specifically with no DeAndre Moore, you see how thin that room truly is in terms of experience, production, guys who have been there and done that. Really, it's just Ryan Wingo. And on top of that, what does that starting lineup, what are that circle of trust look like without a DeAndre Moore right now? You could theoretically make the case that it's only Ryan Wingo and then a couple of guys who are trying to scratch the surface. So it further, in my eyes, further emphasizes the need for Texas to go out in the spring and grab one more guy via the portal, a guy, again, who's played high-level football. We'll obviously talk about that once spring football comes around. But, Jeff, I wanted to get to the new assistant coaches as well, because there's been a lot of turnover. Texas obviously has brought back the DBU originator with Dwayne Aquina. Mark Orfe was talked about, and then he also talked about Mike Bamonte, you know, Hudson Canoto as well, you know, guys that Texas has been familiar with, now back on campus in a higher role. Let's start with Dwayne Aquina because, of course, got to start with the GOAT coming back. To package him with Mark Orfe, you get a youthful guy with maybe not, with still a pretty solid amount of experience coming back home to the state of Texas, but also Coach Akina. What would you have to take away with him kind of bringing back, the greatest defensive back coach Texas has seen?
In my opinion, and I know, look, you can go look at secondaries that had Jerry Gray and Johnny Johnson in them and a lot of NFL guys, a lot of great players. And we're in the Hall of Honor. A lot of those defensive backs are already enshrined in this place. But I think Dwayne Akina coached the best secondary in school history. That 2005 secondary with Terrell Brown, Cedric Griffin, Michael Huff, and Michael Griffin. I mean, Aaron Ross didn't start. He was the nickel backs and won the Thorpe Award the next year. So I say all that to say, Sark mentioned Aaron Ross specifically. Obviously, Huff is in the building. Quandre is, yes. we talked to Quandre a couple of weeks ago on one of our live streams. He's in Austin training, getting ready for, maybe his last season or two in the NFL. And I think for the guys that are on the team, when they've heard a Michael Huff or a Blake Gideon or a Quandre Diggs talk about, hey, I learned what I know about secondary play from Coach Akina, he's got instant credibility, CJ. I think that's the big takeaway with these guys is instant credibility. And I think for Mark Orfe and for Kenoto Hudson, that's a really good guy to learn from. And I know we can kind of get nostalgic about Coach Akina coming back, and that's great. But I think Sark made a really good point. I think Coach Akina's time with Johnny Nansen at Arizona, and you look at what that Arizona defense did in 2023, it was one of the most aggressive, one of the best defenses in the country, playing a lot of man coverage, getting after people. I think that's what Texas wants to do more of, but I think the line of communication, especially with Coach Akina as the defensive passing game coordinator, I think a lot of communication from PK to Johnny Nansen as the co-defensive coordinator to Coach Akina as the defensive passing game coordinator, I think that's going to work out great. And, I'm not knocking Terry Joseph when I say this, but I always wondered, hey, what is that line of communication like between PK and Terry Joseph? Right. Was there something missing? Obviously it worked well last year, but I think, again, you had a chance to maybe upgrade there. And I think you upgraded with Coach Akina, and you got a couple of young coaches, like I said, with Kenoto Hudson and Mark Orfe. So really good mix on the staff. And that's something else I like, CJ. He's gone, Sark with his hires, he's gone young at times, whether it's Tashard Choice or Kenny Baker. He's also gone with experience sometimes to replace coaches. He did that with Johnny Nansen, obviously doing that with Coach Akina. And I thought it was interesting to hear Sark talk about, hey, I look for balance in personalities. I look for balance in experience. Look for balance in recruiting regions, whatever it is. It's not just – I think a lot of times when you have an assistant coach search, you think, all right, get out that board and just hire the best guy available. Well, similar to like when you're recruiting, you don't just pull out a national top 100 list and just start sending out offers, right? You've got to get somebody that fits. So I just think getting a little insight into what Sark looks for when he's making hires, I like hearing that piece of it. And it's kind of stuff we've talked about on the channel when you kind of look at it. It's like, yeah, okay, he went young with this hire. Maybe he goes somebody a little bit more experienced with this next hire. So to kind of hear some of our theories, some of it play out to some extent, I was pretty pumped about that.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to mention as well, on top of bringing Akina back to the 40 acres, look, that was the guy that taught Coach Gideon everything that he knew, right, at college, developing him into the coach that he is today. Obviously, a lot of that has the fingerprints of Coach Akina. To earn the instant respect of the players in that room, I think is a seamless transition that we mentioned as well. But he also talked about Coach Chad Scott, who Texas hired from West Virginia. We have a quick clip right now from Matthew, if you can bring that up whenever. It was a pretty good introduction of what Coach Scott brings to the table and why Sarkeesian went out and added him to his staff.
Ton of respect for Chad and what he's done at Kentucky, North Carolina, West Virginia. He was actually the offensive coordinator and running back coach at West Virginia. I think he's going to add some really nice things to us from not only a schematic standpoint, but his presence with our running backs and what he can do in recruiting in the regions that he's comfortable in recruiting. I think will be great for us.
And so there you have it. Look, a lot of experience, a lot of time around the country at different stops as well. One thing that I wanted to mention, as well as Chad Scott's addition to the staff, is, look, there's a lot of territorial recruitment implications with this new staff. He also mentioned Mark Orfe being able to step in, replace some of the footprints in Florida, Georgia as well. A lot of different places right now that Texas is still recruiting. And for Steve Sarkisian, that job's not going to stop anytime soon. He mentioned as well the big focus for him this offseason was turning down NFL jobs because, again, the NFL, seeing the success that Texas has had over the last 2 seasons, he said the one thing that he was focused on right now is making sure that his job here in Austin only improves. So Sarkeesian turning down NFL interest. He gave us a pretty lengthy quote, actually, Jeff, and we'll have it up on the website afterwards about why he wanted to stay at Texas, what he's focused on building here, and that the job certainly is not close to being finished.
Whether it was the Alabama job last year or NFL jobs this year, what I really dig about Sark, anytime he's been mentioned for opportunities outside of the 40 acres, is he's made it a point to say, I didn't take this job just to put that on a resume or put the hat on and say, I'm the head coach at Texas. He came here to win championships. And, one of the quotes, CJ, that really stuck with me after the Cotton Bowl is, we heard guys all season say, hey, the standard is the standard. Mm-hmm. And to hear Michael Taft got asked specifically, hey, what is the standard? And Michael Taft said, we're back at the point now where winning a national championship is the standard. And we fell short of that standard this year. As great as the 24 season was, guys understand that they're not hoping to compete. They believe they can go win a national championship. That's where Sark has. And I really think, CJ, to hear, and I don't know if Sark's a big podcast listener at this point, at this time of year when he's, in the shop and doing everything else. But to hear Nick Saban come out on the Pivot podcast and say professionally, his biggest regret was leaving LSU to go coach the Miami Dolphins. Pete Carroll was a little bit of a different deal. I think Pete Carroll's been more of an NFL head coach, but I think to hear, if he heard Nick Saban say that, then I think Sark wants to exhaust what he's got at Texas. And we talked about it, man. Mac Brown won a national championship at Texas, should have played for another, should have played for an additional one in 2008, could have played for one in 2001. But, I didn't feel like Mac fully maximized what Texas could be. And you look at the way they're recruiting right now, the talent they've got, the resources available to Sark. I think we could see Texas maximized the way it hasn't been really since those halcyon days of Darrell Royal, when Coach Royal won in 3 national championships, and even the Fred Akers there, as good as it was, you got to the top of the mountain and you kind of looked at the summit, but you didn't quite get there. And that's kind of where Sark is. Sark is at that point, I think, where Fred Akers had it, where you're right there. Can you get over it? Can you climb that last hurdle, grab that last rung, climb up to that last rock and get to the summit, get to the apex? And I don't think he wants to entertain NFL interest, CJ, until I think either one of two things happens. Either he wins a national championship, he gets to the top of the mountain, or the nature of college football. Because he did talk about this too. He didn't like having to prepare for the SEC championship game and deal with signing day that same week. Having to get ready for the Clemson game on the same day the portal opened wasn't ideal.
Said it was a nightmare.
Yeah, but he also said, hey, it's champagne problems, right? Crying from a yacht. All those things Sark typically mentions. So I think unless he either wins a national championship or everything that we talk about with college football, all the moving parts behind the scenes, unless that just gets to the point where you just can't stomach it anymore or it just becomes too much to handle, I think Sark is in here. He's in it for the long haul, and he wants to get Texas to the top of the mountain again.
And we only got a few more minutes, Jeff. So before we get out of here, a quick word from Allegiant Digital, our sponsor for today's Sarkeesian Breakdown.
Yes, thank you to Allegiant Digital Marketing. Are you a business owner who struggles with the following? Finding new customers, consistent leads, finding marketing services to promote your business that actually work? Founder and CEO Chad Markham with Allegiant Digital Marketing, an Austin-based advertising agency, has helped thousands of business owners just like you over 25 years conquer these same challenges. So if you're ready to start making money in your business and grow with confidence, visit allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball and get a free marketing plan. Plus, you can save up to $2,500 in advertising with their Hook 'em Horn special today. Again, visit allegiantdigital.com/ontexasfootball for your free marketing plan. And again, thank you to our sponsor, Allegiant Digital Marketing.
Of course, we're wrapping things up right now for our live breakdown of Sarkeesian's Monday availability. One last thing I wanted to mention before we get out of here. A couple of position changes, because we've known before this, Ryan Niblett moved over to defense to work with the safeties. I wanted to get your quick thoughts on Jelani McDonald, who was mentioned today, and kind of the X factor he could be, obviously having just seen what Jahdae Barron can do in that versatility role for the defense. What do you think about Jelani and what Sarkeesian had to say about him?
So here's the deal. I've praised Sark, CJ, for being really good about not making statements where he backs himself into a corner. And with Jelani, he said, yeah, I'd love to recreate Janae Barron because he could play everywhere. He said, Jelani will play some safety, he's some nickel, some dime linebacker. He said, but where it's going to be when the dust settles, we don't know yet. So I think it's kind of that Swiss Army knife role we've envisioned for Jelani McDonald. I've even said, hey, if you're going to play some more three safety defense, he's perfect for the middle safety in that defense where he could fit the run and do different things. But right now, I think they just want to weaponize him as much as possible. That's a Rod Babers term. It's a term that I love. But I think it's true, CJ. I think he's one of those guys you want to weaponize. I think Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill, I think Jelani McDonald's that third guy that you don't want to pigeonhole him into one position. You want him to play nickel sometimes. Sometimes you want him to be that dime linebacker that we've talked about. I think that Ty Anthony Smith can be at times this year. You want him at safety. So I just think the fact that Sark is they're open to doing whatever. And I think when Dwayne Aquina gets his hands on Jelani McDonald, because remember, Jelani's in that safety room with Coach Aquina. Dwayne Aquina's had versatile defensive backs before. He had a lot of them at Texas. You think about Aaron Williams, Earl Thomas was one of those guys. So Kenny Vaccaro, probably the last in the line of those guys that can do a little bit of everything. Now, I'm not saying Jelani's a Kenny Vaccaro type of guy because we all know Kenny was a little bit different. But at the end of the day, the fact that they haven't pigeonholed Jelani McDonald into a role and they're just leaving it open to just kind of let it happen organically, that's the same thing Sark said about the offense. You know, with as much youth as they've got, they're having to go back to basics and really kind of reteach things and figure out, okay, this was a base principle of our offense. But it worked so well because, you know, we had guys like Jake Majors, like I said, pretty much, except for that Oklahoma game when he was hurt, he's been there almost every snap where Sark's been the head coach when he's called plays on offense. So they're really able to go back to basics and say, this has been a staple of the offense. Maybe it doesn't work. And maybe we need to either get rid of it or tweak it or whatever. That's why I think, you know, Neil Brown's name's come up a lot in the chat. Yeah. That's why I think Neil Brown's coming into Texas at a perfect time, a guy that specializes in the run game. It's weird with Neil Brown. He's an air raid guy that specializes in the run game. But I think if you're tweaking your run game, Neil Brown's coming in here at a perfect time. So, CJ, I just like the fact that Sark is going to let this team grow. Like I said, growth, I think, is going to be my big word this spring. Yeah. But in terms of the player development, schemes, whatever it is, I think just let it grow, see where it goes organically, and then go from there before you kind of basically don't have any preconceived notions about what the 2025 team's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. Speaking on Neil Brown, look, he's been hired. He's added to the staff. Sarkeesian, not many words said about Neil Brown today. He focused more on his on-field assistants who, again, we've talked about recruiting implications, you know, kind of fit with this staff as well. So we've got all offseason to kind of pass these questions along to Sarkeesian later on. But today, no real mention of Brown nor his role with the Texas Longhorns. One last thing, Todd Lacey, are coaching changes done? For now, yes. Yeah.
I'll say this, too, about Neil Brown, and I'll give Sark credit for this. Whether it was Gary Patterson in 2022, Joe DeCamillis and Paul Christ in 2023, and you look at the analysts and the guys in the special assistant roles that he had this past season, anytime he's brought somebody in, and last year wasn't so much special assistant, it was more hiring Johnny Nansen. Every time he's brought somebody in, it's been him taking a look at what the program needs and making a hire accordingly. And I think the fact that he's bringing in Neil Brown, Chad Scott have worked together, so you've got some synergy there with Neil Brown and the staff. I like the fact that this is Sark to me saying, okay, our run game needs to get revamped. We got to take another look at it. Let's get Coach Brown in here because West Virginia the last couple of years had one of the best run games in the country. We've talked about, hey, if you want to have a legit quarterback run game with Arch, again, not that he's going to run Arch 20 times a game, but those 3 or 5 times you're going to let Arch pull the ball down and run, you want to maximize his running ability. Neil Brown is really good for that. So I like the fact that Sark is taking a look and being honest. And I think as your running game evolves, as your quarterback run game gets developed, that's also going to help red zone. That's the only thing Sark said for the red zone today. He's like, just got to execute better, man. And I know that calling plays and everything, but I think if you get the run game with Arch figured out, you get your run game as a whole figured out, CJ, I think that's going to make the red zone. I'm not going to say it's going to fully take care of itself, but you'll be way closer to the finish line on that deal than you are right now.
Well, it can't get any worse. So hopefully, again, that's a big focus.
I'd like to think it can. I don't think it can, but statistically, it was the worst it's been under Sark last year.
So, again, hopefully we're at the floor, and that's what this spring will be for growth, development, players staying light on their feet as well. That'll do it for today.
So y'all know, CJ's kneeling down, and it was leg day today for our guy.
That's right.
He was doing some power cleans. I obviously didn't. So CJ's doing the work. He's doing yeoman's work. He's doing the Lord's work in the weight room for all of us.
Well, that'll do it for today. We'll be back 3:15 for the winning drive with Rod Babers, Coach Shipley, and myself. So we'll catch you guys then, but that'll do it for today in Sarkeesian's first press conference of, spring football coming back.
Chill, laid back Sark today.
Y'all have a good one.
Welcome.